folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let me crank down the background music. I'm going to stick with Granado's music. Add a couple more from this wonderful set of Spanish dances. So here we are again. We're going to take a little different tack today. Maybe a little bit more political tack than strictly religious. A very important one that I think is of interest to not just Americans, but those whose country has been affected by U.S. culture over the last 100 years. And we're going to basically focus on one of a couple of, I would call them dark messiahs or antichrists of American history you may not be aware of. I'm going to title this one, The Merry Old Land of Oz, Heaven for Wicked Ruby Slipping Karens. Okay, well, the merry old land of Oz, everyone knows, ha ha ha, oh ho ho, and a couple of la-di-das. The merry old land of Oz of Hollywood fame. Most of you, if you're aware of that movie, perhaps know that it's based upon a series of children's books written by a cat named L Frank Baum. If you're familiar with derivative works since the original Hollywood classic, with, let's see, who was in that? Ray Bolger, great actor, singer. Buddy Ebsen was supposed to be in it as a Tin Man, but got out of it because the makeup was causing him some very severe skin problems. Probably lucky for him, because if he'd landed that, he might not have ever become Jed Clampett of the Beverly Hillbillies, which is another show that I think had a huge effect on American culture. We'll probably do a separate session just on that one. Who played Dorothy? Gosh, Judy Garland. Miss America's sweetheart at the time, who ended up marrying, what was that other actor's name? I don't know how he ever got all the parts he did, or how he ever landed the girl. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney. Another person that we might want to inquire a bit about at some point. Another Hollywood icon that most people aren't familiar with, but they'll recognize him if they see him on screen. Another child actor who managed to survive into adult stardom in the cult I call Hollyweird. Okay, so let's focus in on this story then. The other thing I was going to mention there is, those of you familiar with derivative works, there's also a musical, and I think it's now been made into a movie called Wicked, which is basically the land of Oz, where the Wicked Witch is the good one, where it shows how she went down the dark path, and you should feel sorry for her because she's a witch because of all the horrible things other people did to her, which is kind of where the wicked ruby slipping Karens theme comes in here. For those of you that aren't familiar with terms that are used in American politics, I want to tell you what a Karen is. A Karen is what you call anybody, male or female, that you consider basically so stupid that you're not going to engage with them at all. It's a very derogatory term that started out being used for women, generally older women, who didn't agree with the arch-feminist agenda where everything woman is good and everything man is bad, who weren't part of the woke cult, which we talk about quite a bit on this channel, and which is absolutely a cult. And that's why we're going to talk about it here, because this is a history of a cult Marxist. A cult in your schools before you ever knew it was a cult. Okay, let's look at this guy, L Frank Baum, a little bit closer. I'm going to switch over to another screen here after I get the right page up on my browser. Sorry, I was looking at something else and I didn't get quite as prepared as I had been. Okay, this is kind of interesting. We're going to look at two short biographies of this interesting fellow. I'm going to show you this one, which is in Indonesian, in Bahasa, the language of my adopted country here. And the title, when I looked at it, was just like, I've got to show this in the original language before I translate it. When I saw this, I nearly laughed my ass off, both because of the Pinulus and Mengenau, which to me sounded a lot like Mengele, who was another more famous cult Marxist, scientist of cult Marxism, and both men I consider Pinulized, despite the fact that they have inspired some pretty good works of fiction. Cult fiction, which became popular because that's what cults are all about, becoming popular, and spreading your dogma through popularity because it's an easy religion to belong to. Okay, well, let's translate this now so we can see what they're saying about this fellow. I'll go down to the text. That's a picture of him. Interesting looking fellow, huh? Let's translate to English. Now, pardon their translation. I'm going to read a little bit of this, and then we'll compare two different biographies. Lyman Frank Baum is a funny name, Baum. Baum is how you really pronounce it, but most people pronounce it Baum. And this guy certainly created something of a bomb. Dual-use technology, definitely. Children's storybook writer from Chittenango, New York. That's upstate New York, America. Born May 15th, 1856. Which, if you listened to my show yesterday, you'll note that that's in the cycle where Marxism grew to power. This was building. This was about the same time, in fact, that the Communist Manifesto was written in Europe. Raised by his parents, Benjamin Ward and Cynthia Stanton Baum, young Frank Baum spent most of his time reading, solitude, and daydreaming about his days because of his heart defect. So he had a heart defect, spent most of his young years under treatment of doctors and probably being babied quite a bit by his loving parents, as you would expect if you have a child who's got such a tough problem. Frank Baum received formal education at his home until he was 12 years old, until he was declared sufficiently cured by a doctor. At that time, in order to strengthen young Frank mentally and physically, his parents sent him to the Peekskill Military Academy. Interesting. Now, here's a little background on this. I don't have any proof, I don't have any evidence, but at the time, military academies were basically very exclusive schools, all boys, which were designed to turn weak boys into men. Needless to say, that was an environment very, very conducive to grooming. If you were a homosexual, if you preyed on boys, liked little boys, a military academy was a great place to be a teacher, because in that day, the teacher was lord and master, as is the case in most authoritarian countries now. And news is coming out about many priests in Catholic schools who were pedophiles. There are many leaders of madrasas and gurus of other religions, all sorts of folks who have been entrusted with the education of children. And a large number of those folks traditionally have been male and tended to attract, interestingly enough, mostly either male or female students. If you look at some of the gurus of great popularity, you will notice that there tends to be a predominance in their audience of either young women or young men, and relatively fewer older people. Now, it just happens to be that this matches the pattern of notorious pedophiles. Like, gee, was there one who committed suicide recently? You get the idea. Yeah. Let's see. So I'm not making any accusations there. Don't sue me, Peekskill Military Academy, but I'm saying that that probably happened just like it happened in the Catholic Church. And at this time, when Protestantism was popular, church schools were looked down on. There were Protestant religious schools, but generally people thought that I didn't want to raise my child in a religious environment because it might be bad for them. And there was a huge upswing in private education, tending to be military academies for boys and prep school for girls, teaching them how to be lovely ladies and belles of the balls. That's what was going on in this era. But instead of helping, young Frank Baum felt immense pressure due to the harsh environment. He lived his dark years at the Peekskill Military Academy for 2 years. Young Frank Baum was then decided to return to homeschooling and left the military academy due to a heart attack. Okay, so maybe something went on there that was more than just punishment. Might have been a fair amount of grooming and bullying, which and manipulation of minds. Little Frank also spent his time developing his interest in literature by reading the novels of Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, and Charles Reade. Now, Dickens is a writer I talk a lot about. He is, the great progressive novelist of England. Exposed a lot of dark things that were happening to average people in workhouses, and the junk that went on at orphanages, the state orphanage system that was kind of used as a grooming organization for folks that wanted pliant assistants, journeymen, of the variety of, if you're familiar with the Christmas Carol, the beset employee of Scrooge, the father of Tiny Tim. Let's see, what was his name? At any rate, he is typical of somebody who is totally dependent on their employer for everything and has to do whatever they say. When they say jump, you ask how high. This was the authoritarianism of the day. His love of writing also grew when he first saw a printer at his father's workplace. He then aspired to become a printer and journalist. Furthermore, Frank Baum married Maud Gage and had 4 sons. Blah, 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 blah. Frank Baum, well, we won't talk more about Maud. We'll see what elsewhere it says about her. Worked as editor and reporter for a newspaper, the Chicago Evening Post, in 1891. Frank Baum's life with his wife and children has not been easy. With the salary he gets from editors and reporters, it's not enough to meet the needs of his family, so Frank Baum has to earn extra income by working as a traveling salesman. Now, let's remember that bit about the traveling salesman, because this is essentially a lie. Why does this Indonesian version of this biography tell that lie? Well, there's a lot of traveling salesmen in India, a lot of people that basically make their living by going from one place to another, delivering stuff, taking goods from, the fruit farms and the rice fields to sell in the city, etc. This is old world economy, and that's still most of Indonesia's population, who is very much at a third world level of development, outside of what you see of the big buildings and whatnot in Jakarta. Most of the country is pretty damn poor. Okay, when her mother-in-law Matilda Jocelyn Gage began spending her winters living with the Baums, she realized that Baum was an excellent child storyteller in her neighborhood. Matilda then urged Baum to start writing children's stories and asked him to publish them to children book publishers. Remember this name too, his mother-in-law. Okay, Baum, who at that time was on the verge of doubt because he predicted that no one would enjoy the story later, was broken by his wife's words to do what her parents-in-law wanted. Who would have thought in 1893 there were 2 publishers interested in his first book? This was the beginning of L Frank Baum's success in his career as a writer of children's stories. L Frank Baum's first children's book was Mother Goose in prose. Published in 1897, this book includes illustrations by the emerging Philadelphia artist Maxfield Parrish. The following year, Baum's second book was published under the title of Funnyland. In 1899, the next book, Father Goose, his book, gained popularity with many people who proved to be and sold as many as 75,000 copies. I guess that was a pretty good run in those days. Yeah, Mother Goose, Father Goose. I smell something fishy here. A few years later, in 1990, Baum published his best children's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which tells of Dorothy's journey to meet the Wizard of Oz. This book managed to become the best-selling children's book in 1900, then earned the name the Best Children's Storybook of the Century by the Minneapolis Journal. Minneapolis is a very, very progressive city, if anybody knows it. Always has been. And the elite of Minneapolis have always been very, 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 very progressive. With the success of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, owned by Frank Baum, he then plans to continue it into several Oz series. The writer known for his work, Wizard of Oz, is back in popularity at this time. During his lifetime, L. Frank Baum was a man who supported the feminist movement and advocated for women's suffrage. This is evident from the majority of the use of female characters as heroes. Biographer Catherine M. Rogers says that Baum was a secure man who was not worried about asserting masculine authority. Interesting. I never heard that before. That sounds like something that was played up to an Indonesian audience where masculine authority is still a mainstream part of their culture. But there is a strong and building counterculture, especially since social media, which is wooing many young women down a very dark path. A path of independence while becoming dependent on prostitution, which is not well publicized but is very, very prevalent, and basically draws many young Indonesian women to seek their fortune in Bali or other countries in the Muslim world, where they won't be so embarrassed for their families to find out that they are really not doing something very good religiously, ethically, morally, and which is leading them to some very dark places. In fact, it ties in with, I'll tell you a little story. When I got here, after I met my wife was home visiting her family, and I went out to have lunch and a glass of wine at a mall right near my house. I walked over there, and there was a place that had a really pretty decent, cheap Italian lunch and a relatively inexpensive glass of wine you could get with it. So I went there, I had my glass of wine, and the server was a nice lady, spoke pretty good English. Got to talking while I was having my wine, and turned out that she had been a model. That's interesting. I used to be a coach of models. I used to teach at a modeling school. So we talked for a while about her modeling career. She said that she'd recently moved back to Indonesia after pursuing a modeling career. I think she said it was in Singapore, perhaps. Maybe Kuala Lumpur, I'm not sure. There's stuff going on there. It was in one of the areas like that is more modern than Indonesian or more traditional Muslim countries. She got into that life, did okay, but was really unhappy with the parties that were thrown, and where she would basically be told to sleep with people if she wanted to move in her career. So basically she was prostituted, and eventually didn't like that life, ended up having a child, and didn't want to raise her child in that environment, didn't want her family to know that was happening, so she moved back to Indonesia, and now as a server is using her English skills. At any rate, this is an example of how some pretty nice ladies are getting turned down a very dark side by cult Marxism coming from the United States. This is dark shit, folks. Okay. Our own lives will not be far from the life story of L Frank Baum. Like L Frank Baum, we too must experience the bitterness of life. For example, from the life of young Frank Baum, who could only spend his childhood lying weak because of illness. Many children out there also experience the same thing as Frank Baum. They have no time to spend in the hospital or at home and watch their friends run and play their favorite games. Oh boy, this plays to the heartstrings of Indonesia, because there's all kinds of orphans and poor kids. We have the orphans here over, at least 3 or 4 times a year. My wife will call up the local orphanage and tell them to come by, bring the kids by, and they pray with us, and we give them some little gifts and a meal. And the imam that is in charge of the orphanage will say a prayer for our family, and that's kind of the way charity works here. Works pretty well. Kind of how charity used to work in the United States before we gave up on religion. By the time we grow up, we may experience doubts, despair for one thing, because the income we receive is not enough to meet the needs of our own family. There are also several students who also work part-time to earn tuition fees, which helping the family's economy, just like L Frank Baum, who becomes a traveling salesman to find additional income for his small family. Now, let me tell you that young women wanting to go to work as traveling salesmen in Indonesia are basically going to work in the sex industry for the most part, or being sold to somebody who wants to buy a wife. I'm sorry, this is truth. In 1919, L Frank Baum died of heart failure and was buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Glendale Ceremony. Glinda Oz is the last book that Baum wrote, which was then published in July 10th, 1920, a year after his death. Long after his death, a new Oz series continued by another writer, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Even though he's gone, his works will continue to be remembered by the public, including his legendary blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then it mentions the movie. Now notice that it conveniently doesn't mention the other movie that followed on, Wicked, which I'm sure they don't want anybody in Indonesia to know about, because they don't want Indonesia to detect that they are being infected by cult Marxism. Now let's contrast this with the entry in Wikipedia. I don't like using Wikipedia that much because it is very much a cult Marxist look at the truth. It's run by people who are letting the Chinese Communist Party write their own articles in Wikipedia and call that truth. So that's an example of what's going on here. Let's see what they have to say about this guy over here. Okay, 14 novels in the Oz series, plus 41 other novels, not including 4 lost unpublished novels, 83 short stories, 200 poems, at least 42 scripts. He made numerous attempts to bring his works to the stage and screen. The 1939 adaptation became a landmark of 20th century cinema. Okay. Born and raised in upstate New York, as I mentioned, he moved west after an unsuccessful stint as a theater producer and playwright. He and his wife opened a store in South Dakota, and he edited and published a newspaper. Then they moved to Chicago, where he worked as a newspaper reporter and published children's literature, coming out with the first Oz book in 1900. While continuing his writing, among his final projects, he sought to establish a film studio focused on children's films in Los Angeles, California. His works anticipated such later commonplaces as television, augmented reality, laptop computers, the master key, wireless telephones, TikTok of Oz, women in high-risk and action-heavy occupations, Mary Louise in the country, and the ubiquity of clothes advertising, Aunt Jane's nieces at work. Okay, let's go on to his childhood and early life. He was born into a devoutly Methodist family. He had German, Scots, Irish, and English ancestry. He was the 7th of 9 children of Cynthia Ann and Benjamin Ward Baum. His father succeeded in many businesses, including barrel making, oil drilling in Pennsylvania, oil drilling, and real estate. Baum grew up on his parents' expansive estate. Okay, now who's lying here? The Indonesian one that said he was so poor growing up that he had to work as a traveling salesman, which he fondly recalls as a sort of paradise. It's located in Mattydale, New York. Frank was a sickly, dreamy child, tutored at home with his siblings. From the age of 12, he spent 2 miserable years. Okay, they're matching the information here. But after being severely disciplined for daydreaming, he had a possibly psychogenic heart attack and was allowed to return home. Interesting. Baum started writing early in life, possibly prompted by his father buying him a cheap printing press. Now, how many poor people do you think in this day bought their children printing presses? Somebody's lying here. And why? He had always been close to his younger brother, Henry Clay Baum, who helped in the production of Roselawn Home Journal. The brothers published several issues of the journal, including advertisements from local businesses, which they gave to family and friends for free. By the age of 17, Baum established a second amateur journal called The Stamp Collector. My dad was a stamp collector too. At 20, Baum took on the national craze of breeding fancy poultry. He specialized in raising the Hamburg chicken. blah, blah, blah. Now, this isn't the sort of thing that a poor orphan is going to be doing. Somebody that's going to work as a traveling salesman. They're telling lies to Indonesians. Why? Well, we'll get into that. Baum had a flair for being the spotlight of fun in the household, including during the times of financial difficulties. His selling of fireworks made the 4th of July memorable. His skyrockets, Roman candles, and fireworks filled the sky, while many people around the neighborhood would gather in front of the house to watch the displays. Christmas was even more festive. Baum dressed as Santa Claus for the family. His father would place the Christmas tree behind a curtain in the front parlor, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So maybe there were some financial difficulties. How does a successful family like that get into financial difficulties? Well, speculation. This was an era of speculation. The well-connected people would try to share the best ideas of how to make money, and sometimes the better connected ones would take advantage of the less well-connected ones, and they would become poor very quickly. This is a pattern that has been, it's basically a pattern called gentrification. You build people up and then you chop them down. The Chinese call it chives. They refer to themselves as chives. The Communist Party lets you grow up till you look like an attractive target, then they cut your head off and take your money. This is how it works. This works in Indonesia too. Anywhere you have authoritarian government. And although Indonesia is a democracy of sorts, it is fairly authoritarian. Let's see. Now, nowhere in here does it mention him being a traveling salesman. Dry goods company. Okay, maybe as a dry goods company person, he went out and he worked out deals, distribution deals for that. That's not being a salesman. I'm sorry, that image of him out on the streets like your average Indonesian peasant hawking their wares, that just didn't happen here. Baum could never stay away long from the stage. He performed in plays under the stage names of Louis F. Baum and George Brooks. Interesting. Why would he change his name to be on the stage? No commentary on that. 80, his father built him the theater. Now, again, is this a poor guy? Is this somebody who had any real hard financial times? Father built him a theater in Richburg, New York. Baum set about writing plays and gathering a company to act them. Maid of Erin proved a modest success, a melodrama with songs based on William Black's novel A Princess of Thule. Baum wrote the play and composed songs for it, making a prototypical musical, as its songs relate to the narrative and acted in the leading role. I wonder if he played the princess. Doesn't say, but that would presume to have been the leading role of a play called The Maid of Erin, which was based on a novel, A Princess of Thule. Interesting. Perhaps this Baum cat was a cross-dresser. His Aunt Catherine Gray played his character's aunt. She was the founder of Syracuse Oratory School, and Baum advertised his services in her catalog to teach theater, including stage business, playwriting, directing, translating, revision, and operettas. So-and-so Baum married Maud Gage, a daughter of Matilda Jocelyn Gage, a famous woman suffrage and feminist activist. While Baum was touring with The Maid of Erin, the theater in Richburg caught fire during a production of Baum's ironically titled parlor drama Matches, destroying the theater as well as the only known copies of many of Baum's scripts, including matches as well as costumes. Interesting. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things catching fire in China these days, conveniently destroying records, and gosh, it seems like that might have been a little bit about what happened on 9/11. Curiouser and curiouser. The South Dakota years. In July 1888, Baum and his wife moved to Aberdeen, Dakota Territory. Now, if you don't know anything about the Dakotas, Dakota Territory was Indian land. This was part of a large plot of land that was given to the Indians in treaty, which was then broken because of people like these that moved to Dakota Territory and just took the land from the Indians because, well, they could. And this is what started the Indian Wars that resulted in Custer's Last Stand and the horrific events of the remainder of the Sioux tribe being relocated to Florida, where he opened a store called Baum's Bazaar. His habit of giving out wares on credit led to the eventual bankrupting of the store. So Baum turned to editing the local newspaper. You kind of notice something that ties in theme about what some of the scions of progressivism are all about. Spending other people's money and then going bankrupt. When he wrote the column Our Landlady, following the death of Sitting Bull at the hands of an Indian police agency police, Baum recommended the wholesale extermination of all Americans' native peoples. Well, they didn't mention that in the other thing. They mentioned that he's accused of being racist, but it is unclear whether Baum meant it as a satire or not, especially since his mother-in-law, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, received an honorary adoption into the Wolf Clan of the Mohawk Nation and was a fierce defender of Native American rights. Well, here's what he wrote. Verbatim, the pioneer has before declared that our only safety depends on the total extermination of the Indians, having wronged them for centuries. Oh no, this is the response. He returned after the massacre at Wounded Knee and said this. Well, what did he actually say originally? Oh, well, we aren't given that. I'll tell you what he wrote. He wrote exactly that. He advocated for the extermination of the Indians because they were scared in Aberdeen that they were going to be scalped. And this is how authoritarian progressives act. When they feel threatened, their security is the most important thing because they're not really Christians. They don't have any religion but progressivism, which is basically authoritarian justification of whatever we want, and we force it on everybody else. This is what the fake left in the U.S., the fake left all over the world is all about. And it plays very well into both the communist and the fascist narratives in a country. Baum's description of Kansas, the one and only business experiences in drought-ridden South Dakota. During much of this time, Matilda was living. Oh, so this arch-feminist was actually living with them in the Baum household. Well, that sounds like a pretty hardcore progressive, arch-progressive household. Let's see. He sang in a quartet which included James Kyle, who became one of the first populist People's Party senators in the U.S. Gee, was there a People's Party? That sure sounds like a Communist Party, doesn't it? Baum's newspaper failed in 1891, and he, Maud, and her 4 sons moved to the Humboldt Park section of Chicago, where Baum took a job reporting for the Evening Post. Beginning in 1897, he founded and edited a magazine called The Show Window, later known as Merchant's Record and Show Window, blah, blah, blah. Okay, again, still, I don't see any. Oh, he also had to work as a traveling salesman. So maybe this is where he worked. Yeah. In supply chain, a vendor, supplier, provider, or seller is an enterprise that contributes goods and services. Generally, a supply chain vendor manufactures inventory stock items and sells them to the next in the chain. That's how they define a traveling salesman? Give me a break. You're defining a traveling salesman as a globalist profiteer. Somebody who has access to the production, and maybe on a small scale, maybe they're doing the transportation, but somebody who controls the supply chain. That's not the average person. They're spinning this narrative to make him look like he was some populist hero. He was a member of the elite who could pretty much do anything they wanted, start a new business, get money from mommy and daddy to go do this. Contacts all over in the elite of the U.S. of the time. And he's selling a political narrative here. In 1897, he wrote and published Mother Goose in Prose, a collection of Mother Goose rhymes written as prose stories and illustrated maximum parents. Moderate success, which allowed Baum to quit his sales job, which had a negative impact on his health. In 1899, he partnered with Father Goose, a collection of nonsense poetry. This book was a success, becoming the best-selling children's book of the year. Now, why would you name a book of nonsense poetry Father Goose? Sounds like an anti-male narrative to me. Propaganda for the feminist side, perhaps. I don't know. I don't have a copy of that book. Maybe if somebody can scare one up in their library, still, it might be interesting to see what's in that book. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Critical acclaim success. 2 years after the Wizard's publication, Baum and Denslow teamed up with composer Paul Chin, the director, blah blah, produced a musical stage version of the book under Fred R. Hamlin. That's a very interesting name. Baum and Chin worked on a musical of The Wonderful World of Oz in 1901 and based closely upon the book, but it was rejected. The stage version opened up in Chicago in 1902, the first to use the shortened title The Wizard of Oz. I've actually seen that stage version performed. It's still very frequently done in dinner theaters, children's theaters. Very often done because it has all these roles for children. Munchkins. Toured the United States with much of the same cast as was done in those days, and then became available for amateur use. The stage version differed quite a bit from the book and was aimed primarily at adults. Toto was replaced with Imogene the cow, and Trixie Trifle, a waitress, and Pastoria, a streetcar operator, were added as fellow cyclone victims. The Witch of the West was eliminated entirely in the script, and the plot became about how the four friends were allied with a usurping wizard and were hunted as traitors to Pastoria II, the rightful King of Oz. It is unclear how much control and influence Baum had on the script. It appears that many of the changes were written by Baum against his wishes due to contractual requirements with Hamlin. Jokes in the script, mostly written by him. Actually, this isn't the version that is performed. The version that's performed was written some other time, which maybe didn't credit this original version. Called for explicit references to President Theodore Roosevelt, Senator Mark Hanna, Reverend Andrew Danquer, and oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller. I wonder what those references were, because in fact, President Theodore Roosevelt, after he was president, started the American Progressive Party, not the Populist Party. So progressivism has rather changed its definition too. I encourage you to go look at the platform of the American Progressive Party. You might hear it referred to as the Bull Moose Party, kind of a derogatory way it's described in history classes. And Teddy Roosevelt is basically turned into a figure of fun. Most people never heard of him until they go see Arsenic and Old Lace, another popular stage show from the 1930s, where he is presented as the crazy nephew of these two women who poison old men out of the kindness of their heart, because the men are obviously so worthless that they have to go rent rooms from these old women. There's some really dark connections here. Let's see. Subsequent version of the story, including newer editions of the novel entitled Wizard of Oz. In more recent years, restoring the full title has become increasingly common, particularly to distinguish the novel from the Hollywood film. Other works, blah, blah, blah. Let's see if they talk about any of these other ones that they mention. I want to see if they've got any more about this TikTok thing. Prior to his last produced play was The TikTok Man of Oz. It has little to do with TikTok and is primarily the quest of the Shaggy Man to rescue his brother and his resulting conflict with the Gnome King. Now, where have we come across a Shaggy Man before rescuing a brother? Well, that's the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest spiritual stories in the world. Now, why would you retell that as the TikTok of Oz? Weird. Started his own film manufacturing, Oz Film Manufacturing Company. Came as an outgrowth of the Uplifters. What's an uplifter? These are basically, the Uplifter, play titles, The Uplift of Lucifer. The Uplifters. Might be a Luciferian cult. He served as its president and principal producer and screenwriter. The rest of the board consisted of Louis F. Gottschalk. I know that's a composer. Studied music in Stuttgart, Germany. His great uncle was a more famous composer. Haldeman. Where have we heard that name before? Clarence R. Rundell. Films are directed by J. Farrell McDonald. I remember him. He was a good character actor. Cast included Violet McMillan, Vivian Reed, Mildred Harris. First wife of Charlie Chaplin. Where have we heard that name before? Gosh, Charlie Chaplin. Communist. Juanita Hansen. American actress who performed in silent films, Bathing Beauty, serials, troubled personal life, and struggled with addiction to cocaine. Pierre Couderc, French screenwriter, actor, acrobat, and film producer. May Wells. Be related to a cat named Orson? Who knows? Doesn't say. J. Charles Hayden, American film and silent film area. 12 films between 1914 and 1920. Played the Scarecrow of Oz. Okay. Harold Rawson. Who's this cat? Okay, so he's known for the work on the fantasy film The Wizard of Oz. So silent film actor becomes a major pusher of The Wizard of Oz after L Frank Baum was dead. Was the cinematographer on The Wizard of Oz. Interesting. After little success probing the unrealized children's film market, Baum acknowledged his authorship of The Last Egyptian and made a film of it, portions of which are included in Decasia. Where's that? Okay, history of film. Changed the name to Dramatic Film Features. Hollywood studio. It doesn't say who it was all bought up by or transformed into at the end. He invested none of his own money in the venture, unlike the fairy log and radio players. The stress probably took its toll on his health. Okay, and then it talks about him dying of stroke and blah, blah, blah. Baum's beliefs. This might be an interesting section. Baum's avowed intentions with the Oz books and his other fairy tales was to retell tales such as those which are found in the works of the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen, remake them in an American vein, update them, omit stereotypical characters such as dwarfs or genies, and remove the association of violence and moral teachings. In other words, cult Marxism. Plagiarism, stealing of culture, repurposing it as anti-culture, tearing apart traditions that had stood for hundreds and thousands of years. And this is a theme that we talk about many times on my podcast, how cult Marxism is nothing new. The versions of classics from the Brothers Grimm, from Hans Christian Andersen, from even older writers of children's stories, Aesop, back in the Greek times, have been changed and cult Marxized. If you want to see a real good example of this, I have a segment that I did about what happened to the little red hen. Look through my content and you can find that and see how that story has been turned into something that very different than what it was that it was told to children as for literally thousands of years. Let's see. Another traditional element that Baum intentionally omitted was the emphasis on romance. He considered romantic love to be uninteresting to young children, as well as largely incomprehensible. In The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the only elements of romance lay in the background of the Tin Woodman and his love for Nimmy Ammy, which explains his condition but does not affect the tale in any other way. And the background of Guyalette, what's that? Well, that's a character that's in the book that's not in the movie. Interesting. And the enchantment of the winged monkeys. Interesting. Now, why would he be disdainful of romantic love? This might seem strange to you, but that was considered something that was dirty and beneath humanity in the Victorian age. And the U.S. in this time was very much influenced by the Victorians. This was also very, very evident in the writing of folks like Marx and Engels, who, although they had wives, they considered their romantic life as just kind of a cross, check the box. I got to do that because I'm human, but it's what we want to breed out of humanity. They had the idea that sex was something that needed to be destroyed, taken out of the human experience. They believed that was one of the two things that caused humanity to be so hard to manage, difficult. The other being religion. This is the era where even the religious viewed religion as a burden not as a useful part of education. They tried to remove it from schools instead of what would have been the more logical thing to basically say, well, let's educate a little bit on comparative religion and let people decide for themselves whether they like their current religion, whether they want to consider another one, or whether they want to go become one of the growing tribe of agnostics and atheists, the worshippers of science. Political. This should be interesting. Women's suffrage advocate. When Baum lived in Aberdeen, South Dakota, he was secretary of his Equal Suffrage Club. Much of the politics in the Republican Aberdeen Saturday Pioneer dealt with trying to convince the populace to vote for women's suffrage. Yes, this was a Republican state. This was a Republican guy, a Republican progressive. Republicans were the progressives back in those days, and they turned into the Democrats, who called themselves progressive, but were no more progressive than the Republicans had been. They were basically fascists and communists. Susan B. Anthony visited Aberdeen and stayed with the Baums. Now that's a big name in feminism. That's the arch-feminist women's rights activist of the United States. I'm not saying she's a bad person. I think women should have equal rights. But we know, if we have our eyes wide open now, that it's gone completely the other direction. And women are more equal than men now. The Wonderful Mother of Oz. So these guys even got involved in publishing his books. So this is where he got his funding. Who encouraged his work? Who sponsored him to succeed? Let's see. General Ginger. That sounds like a female. Oh, it is a General Ginger, a female general. In a very sort of Soviet Marxist looking outfit. Leads the girls and women of Oz in a revolt, armed with knitting needles. They succeed and make the men do the household chores. Ginger proves to be an incompetent ruler, but Princess Ozma, who advocates gender equality, is ultimately placed on the throne. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's eugenicist. This is another topic that they don't bring up very often. How many eugenicists there were in this progressive, arch-feminist world of the time. If you don't know what eugenics is, that's basically transhumanism. It was used to be called eugenics until it got very much discredited when it was exposed that it was being experimented with by the elite of all countries, in fact, and actually being turned into a science by the Nazis. When all that went underground and all the Nazi scientists became good guys and went to work in secret government labs in the USSR, the UK, and the United States. His Edith Had 9 stories depict girls and young women engaging in traditionally masculine activities, including Aunt Jane's Nieces and The Flying Girl, and its sequel. The Bluebird books feature a girl sleuth. Nothing wrong with that. Girls need heroes. I find it disturbing, somewhat, that a man would be making his life's work writing stories for girls. If I was a woman, I'd be very, very suspicious of having my children be indoctrinated by a man who thought he needed to indoctrinate girls. Racial views. Here's some interesting stuff. Okay, maybe it'll quote his his darker passages. During the period surrounding the 1890 Ghost Dance movement, Baum wrote 2 editorials asserting that the safety of white settlers depended on the wholesale genocide of American Indians. These editorials were republished in 1990 by sociologist Robert Venables of Cornell University, who argues that Baum was not using sarcasm. That was how folks tried to rehabilitate Baum and turn him into the progressive hero that you didn't have to be embarrassed by. This stuff is still going on right now with the cancel culture. People are getting canceled because they can't rehabilitate them fast enough to hide all the dark things that these folks are doing, the Hollywood cult. The first piece was published on December 20th, 1890, 5 days after the killing of the Lakota Sioux holy man Sitting Bull. The piece opined that with Sitting Bull's death, the nobility of the redskin had been extinguished, and the safety of the frontier would not be established until there was total annihilation of the remaining Native Americans, who he claimed lived as miserable wretches. Baum said that their extermination should not be regretted, and their elimination would do justice to the manly characteristics of their ancestors, turning them into martyrs. Maybe that's what they wanted, because they were going to play up this martyrdom later. The Wounded Knee Massacre occurred 9 days later. Second editorial was published on, and you see how these guys stir up trouble and then step in like the heroes after and say, oh, see, if you just done what we told you to begin with, you wouldn't have had to have this battle. And then they blame it all on the Department of War, who was just protecting these illegal settlers because they were being attacked by the Indians. They tried to protect the Indians too, and were caught in the middle of a battle between these loving progressives and the Native Americans that they were going to pretend to love and represent after they'd exterminated them. Oh, this is sick. Baum mentions his character's distaste for a Hopi snake dance. How many of you have heard much about the Hopi prophecy and how that is tied to this New Age spiritual rainbow cult? Yeah, I wonder who invented that rainbow cult stuff and how much they were paid for it. Let's see. Disprove Anglo stereotypes which portrays Mexicans as lazy. Okay, so we're making a hero of him. Political imagery in The Wizard of Oz. Upstate, he wrote a solitary article in 1964. The first full-fledged interpretation of the novel is an extended metaphor of the politics and characters of the 1890s. He paid special attention to the populist metaphors and debates over silver and gold. Baum was a Republican and avid supporter of women's suffrage, and it is thought that he did not support the political ideals of either the populist movement or the Bryanite Silver Crusade. Bryan is actually Democrat, arch-Democrat, one of the original snakes of the deep state, in fact. He published a poem in support of William McKinley, who, if you know much about McKinley, is the one who basically got Alaska. I think Seward's Folly was the one who negotiated it, but he was one of the cabinet of McKinley, so he blamed it on his. Oh, and one of the presidents that was assassinated. Oh, interesting. It's probably worth investigating. There's a lot of loose ends to tie up here. I'm just going to give you some highlights you don't probably know about this character that wrote books, well, that your kids probably never read anymore, but movies that they most certainly still are watching, and created cultural metaphors that still hold. Okay. Religion. Let's see what that says here. Baum was originally a Methodist in the Episcopal Church. That's the Church of England after it stopped being the Church of England. Very much more like the Catholic Church. In order to participate in community theatricals. Okay, I guess you had to be a member of the church to be a member of the community theater. I don't approve of that. Later, he and his wife were encouraged to become members of the Theosophical Society. There we go. Neoplatonists. The Manly crowd. The, Blavatsky crowd. The folks that created this New Age spirituality that's all over the world and being sold by all sorts of grifters and the people I just absolutely disgusted with selling their nonsense of cosmic oneness. Baum's beliefs are frequently reflected in his writings. However, the only mention of a church in his Oz books is the porcelain one, which a cowardly lion breaks in the dainty China country in the wonderful world of Oz. The Baums sent their older sons to ethical culture Sunday school. Ethical culture movement, ethical humanism. Simply ethical culture is an ethical, educational, or religious movement that is usually traced back to Felix Adler. Boy, that's a very familiar name. Adler, Stella Adler, I bet is related to Felix. And related to a lot of Nazis, I believe. National Socialists, which were very active in America at this time. Calling themselves progressive, but who were actually fascists. Writers, including Shorts, among others, have suggested that Baum intentionally used allegory and symbolism in the Wizard of Oz to convey concepts that are central to spiritual teachings, such as theosophy and Buddhism. Bang! Neo-Buddhism is what I refer to as this cosmic oneness, Christ consciousness. We're all one, experiencing God in this incarnation, and we're going to go back to source when we're done. We're just having God's masturbation fantasies. Don't worry. These people are crazy. I postulate the main character's experiences in Oz represent the soul's journey toward enlightenment. Schwartz specifically states that key plot elements of the books take the reader on a journey guided by Eastern philosophy. An article in BBC Culture lists several allegorical interpretations of the book, including that it may be viewed as a parable of theosophy. The article cites various symbols and their possible meanings. For example, the yellow brick road representing the golden path in Buddhism, along which the soul travels to a state of spiritual realization. Well, I am going to tell you that what I consider the meaning of the yellow brick road is easy spirituality. Following the golden road, pursuing money, pursuing materialist things, and then, hallelujah, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist, I get to go to heaven. You know, because you go to church every Sunday, or you meditate, do your transcendental meditation. I've hung around some of these people when I was awakening and trying to figure out what my spiritual experience meant in context of other ones, because I am an integrator, not a dogmatic preacher. I find out the truth by using my experience, understanding my experience in the context of other experiences, and real science. Science that stands up to scrutiny, isn't just the pronouncement of some PR head of science that says, I am the science. Okay, Baum's own writings suggest he believed the story and may have been divinely inspired. It was pure inspiration. It came to me right out of the blue. I think that sometimes the great author had a message to get across, and he was to use the instrument at hand. Now, how do I make sense of that? I'm telling you that inspirations, spiritual inspirations, can come from many sources, not just God. There are many gods and goddesses, and they've basically been running things while God himself was incarnating, trying out this system that karma had developed and the rest of the family had developed as a final test of it. And that's what we've been doing for a long time on this planet. The inspirations people are getting are from these factions who are playing part of this game. The game is, if you are happy with how things are, you want God to sleep longer. If you're unhappy with it, you want to wake him up. And basically, if you know much about the truth, you fall into one of these two categories. And various organizations fall on different sides of that. And there are multiple factions within the sides. Little known fact of Kabbalistic Judaism, there was a very popular Jewish rabbi who proclaimed himself to be the Dark Messiah. I don't know what he called himself, but basically his believers and what he preached was that, you know what, the Messiah is not going to come until things are so bad that we create so much evil that's going to attract God. And he drew a very large following and a lot of fear and oh my God reactions. And I think he was killed or something like that. And, you know, his followers were banished from official Judaism. But I'm pretty sure they continued in an occult sense and maybe teamed up with other occultists who knew this much of the truth, that yes, it does take a large amount of spiritual energy for a major change, a major new structure to develop in the multiverse. The multiverse is based upon a fractal. A fractal is a mathematical representation of the structure underlying patterns. Okay? Adding karma, different laws of karma, are changes in patterns. Very, very fundamental patterns that have to be very thoroughly tested and proven before there's enough spiritual energy behind it to make it a law. That would pretty much make new laws almost impossible. That's why eventually working on karma was concentrated on this one solar system, this one planet. That became the test tube for this new law that was going to affect most of the multiverse. Not all of it, because some gods prefer not to live by the rules. Those are the gods that run heavens or hells, attracting souls to them in the afterlife so that they can train them in their particular religion, send them back to go fight on their side in the physical universes, if they're allowed. Okay, yeah. He says it's the great author had a message to get across. He's the instrument at hand. I kind of like this concept of the great author, except that there are a lot of great authors. And yes, every soul did originate from the first soul, but they have had their own experiences, their own history. And yeah, ultimately, the first soul, God, holds all the copyrights. the original copyrights to everything. But that doesn't make him the great author. That's why God is not an authoritarian, is not this all-powerful cat you think he is. That's why he made free will. That's why he made a family, because he didn't want to have to do all the work. He didn't want to have to write all the books or inspire everybody. He wanted to get a chance to retire sometime and catch up on all the reading he missed. If you think you're being inspired by a great author that gives you this vision that you've just got to go do, you've got to wonder who that great author is and what sort of political message they're trying to push. I'm telling you that this cat, L Frank Baum, was pushing a religion and was a very definite believer in a religion that's being pushed to your children, that has been pushed to your children in shifting form ever since elite numpties who thought they knew better than you how to raise your children started wanting to educate them for you at public expense, or in private schools that are funded by public expense, which is why I don't really agree with either of the parties in terms of their idea of perfect religion. I don't like the voucher idea. I don't like the we dictate everything from Washington idea. I think each community ought to be able to vote on what curriculum they want in their schools. It should be made public, it should be obvious, and children's parents should be able to sit in, record, or whatever, what their kids are doing. We have the technology to do it. You can go watch Congress if you want and see them debating and whatnot. I think that's a great thing. We need to see what our leaders are doing, especially the leaders we're entrusting our children to, which are teachers and teacher administrators. Those meetings absolutely need to be open, need to be recorded, need to be part of the public record, and people need to be able to speak up freely there and voice their opinions and say, I don't like the way you're teaching our children. Can you justify that? If you can't, or if I still don't like it, let's vote on it. Let's change the school board. Let's expel administrators if we have to. They represent you. You don't represent them. You get what's wrong with America is everybody wants to tell everybody else what to do. They want to be the God. That's not what God is. If you think like that, you're thinking like anti-God. You're thinking like Borg, or you're thinking like Lucifer, or you're thinking like Lilith. The three characters that are the bad guys in this story, the ultimate bad guys. They gang up to try to stop God from coming, stop God from waking up, because they don't want this game to end. Now they fight amongst each other. Lucifer wants to be the Pope of all religions, the one God, the authoritarian who gets to just make the decisions he wants and delegate what he doesn't want to deal with. The Donald Trump of heaven, if you will. Lilith is the smothering mother who wants to dictate everything, make a law for everything, make all the children eat the same porridge, eat at the same time, read the same stories. Okay, I think we know who the Lilithians are in this story. Borg is the ultimate beneficiary of both, because both eventually want to turn people into a hive mind. They want an Orwellian system of government where a small cabal of leaders of the elite decide all the rules and enforce it on everybody else and use their media and their education systems and their indoctrination systems to sell whatever nonsense that they agree is what we want to sell right now to the next version of children. They are programming your children. Now, granted, you program your children too. As a parent, that is your right, as long as your program is not against the law. You're not allowed to abuse your children. You shouldn't be allowed to murder your children. God. You know, there needs to be limits. There needs to be a balance of power. No one should be the absolute authoritarian, neither mother or father. The older siblings shouldn't be the absolute master of their little brothers and sisters. That's not the way God works. If it's not working for God, you can be damn sure it's not going to work for you. God's tried everything. That's why he's got such a mixed up family. It's not all perfect. It's getting better. And this event we're going through is part of making it better. Because God finally woke up and saw that, you know what, the porridge is just about right. I think it's time for Baby Bear to become Big Bear. And, yeah, the Great Bear. Interesting set of constellations. I've talked about them a little bit before, but why do we have an Ursa Major and an Ursa Minor? And it's not part of the zodiac. Yet the North Star is part of that constellation, the one that we have used for time immemorial as the guide to figure out where we are. It's a special constellation. It's a symbol, like all of the constellations, like the motions of the planets, like the motion of the moon, like the flux of a woman's period, the length of the gestation of a fetus. These are things that form a pattern. Patterns that were left for humanity to make connections between things. Why is it that way? Why does a woman take 9 months to have a baby and other species take a different amount of time? Why does a human being live an average about 72 years? But we've got books like the Bible, the Vedas, the Sanskrit writings that have kings lists that have kings living thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. Is that fiction? Do laws change? It was an interesting thing, just a side note before I wrap this one up. Very, very respected scientist. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but he is probably the most minded scientist I can think of. Rupert Sheldrake. He's got an interesting point. I just read or just observed some of his content or somebody that was interviewing him. I think they were talking about a banned TED Talk he did, where he basically questioned the laws of science. Asked why, in fact, the official measurements of the speed of light varied over time. He asked it of the metrology experts, and they said, well, we fixed that. And he said, well, how did you fix that? Well, we redefined the speed of light based on the length of a meter. And therefore, it all works out now because that just means, well, wait a minute. Does that mean the meter is getting longer and shorter? There's some stuff going on here that scientists cannot explain. And it's not just quantum mechanics. It's not just stuff that we haven't done enough experiments yet. It's not just stuff that we got to get a higher energy particle accelerator, a better CERN, to find out. There is a fundamental truth that science is completely blind to. And that is the fundamental truth that this isn't reality. They know it. You're 99.9% made out of nothing. Every single particle within you can act as a wave or as a particle, depending on how you look at it, how you observe it. Because every single thing inside of you, every single thing, matter or energy, is the manifestation of a soul. There are so many souls in the multiverse, they are uncountable. Not all of them have a lot of consciousness. Most of them are programmed to do like they do, and they will always do, and they'll never really have a decision to make until somebody looks closely enough at them to ask, well, are you spin up or spin down? And they'll be like, oh, somebody caught me in their sights. I gotta decide quick. And boom, they start making their first independent decision, thinking for themselves. This is the only way you can become conscious. You don't become conscious by following the yellow brick road. You don't become conscious by meditating yourself into nirvana. This is spiritual bypassing. This is the opposite of enlightenment. And that's what these people are doing politically. That's what they're doing religiously. They are trying to dumb down humanity to make them easier to control by the people who really are more conscious and want to use you, because they are closer to their masters, to their Lucifer, to their Lilith, or they are completely controlled by Borg, which is a real force and has invaded every one of the species that are fighting over this planet, either fighting for this planet, for this species, or fighting against it. A lot of them don't know God exists. They don't believe any more than most humans, because it's been going on a long time. Or they think God's the bad guy. We got to fight this authoritarian, micromanaging God. Or the species that think they're God. The species that oppressed us and kept us down for so long, who played at being our gods. There are so many factions in play here. You got to be really careful whose side you jump on. If you support tyranny, you are against God. Doesn't matter what the tyranny is. If you support a tyrannical church, a church that oppresses people, a church that says, well, anybody who's not a Christian is beneath my consideration, they're wrong. If you belong to a church that says, oh, we have Christ consciousness, everybody is part of us, we're open to all. Okay, well, that's a very pliable Christian, isn't it? Are you open to murderers? Are you open to pedophiles? Are those great people? Well, if you're one of these oneness nuts, all these Christ consciousness nuts, you say, oh, well, they're just having a bad day. They'll get better. We just need to love them enough. I'm sorry, you are supporting tyranny. All the religions of one, all the ideologies of one, all the politics of one party, one issue, one sex, one race, they are all tyrannies. It's not about one, it's about many. Diversity is not about making a new one, making a new privileged class. That's anti-diversity. Critical thinking is not about free thinking. It's about narrow-minded thinking. You challenge anybody that doesn't kowtow to your dogma. Critical thinking is exactly how we got so disconnected and pulled apart. I was going to save this for another talk, but I don't have that much material on this guy, but here's another antichrist of the United States to do some investigation in. John Dewey. Now, you've probably heard of the Dewey Decimal Classification System of the library. Wow, that's a great thing. He helped us organize our libraries. Well, here's one thing that I got to tell you. What's behind that organization? Who gets to decide what's fiction and what's nonfiction? Huh? Who decides that? And picks out where in the library the book goes and where it doesn't. Whether it goes in the children's section or the adult section, or is completely thrown out of the library. Who should decide that? Some guy at the Library of Congress? What's their agenda? This John Dewey, in fact, was the person who invented critical thinking. This phrase did not exist till that man used it. And he grew up in this exact same period as L Frank Baum, of these Numpty Dumpty elitists who wanted to fix all the world's problems by forcing solutions down everybody's throat. Exactly like they did during the Civil War, which was not about slavery. It was about states' rights and how you go about making new laws. Now, granted, slavery was essentially unconstitutional. It was against the principles of the United States, and most of the formers realized that and wanted to abolish slavery when the Constitutional Convention was held. Fact was that they couldn't have had everybody sign up, all the 13 colonies sign up to the Declaration of Independence if they'd kept anti-slavery in it, because they were slave states. So they agreed to disagree and tabled that issue for later. It kept boiling up until it didn't get resolved by legal means. It did in many states. There were states that decided, we're just not going to do this anymore. New York was a slave state. Did you know that? Did you know that? There were many slaves in New York until New York decided, we're not going to be a slave state anymore. If you want to bring your slaves here, they're going to become free men and women. Well, maybe not women. That came a little bit later. The point was that these changes were already happening within the framework of the United States Constitution, which delegated any power not specifically assigned to the federal government to the states. Many states had gradually eliminated slavery. The states that kept slavery, here's something you probably don't know, were dominated by Democrats. They were Democrat states. The Republican states were these progressive ones that wanted to push anti-slavery. And both were wrong. The southern states wanted to keep their authoritarian system in place. It benefited them. They were Democrats. Democrat authoritarians who made their money off slavery, found it profitable. In the North, slavery didn't work. They were authoritarians that wanted to basically outvote the South by importing workers who they employed like slaves with wages, which is what was going on in England at the time. The workhouses, indentured servitude. England didn't have slaves then. They abolished it too and created something that was even worse than slavery. Because at least when you're a slave, your owner has the responsibility to feed you and is probably going to be looked down upon by their neighbors if they kill you, if they mistreat you. Under wage slavery, oh, we gave them a job. Not our fault if they didn't have enough money. Not our fault if, they started drinking and got depressed and committed suicide. Just saves us a lot of money on retirement programs. This is how the North thought. This is how Republicans thought. They were just as bad as the South. And anyone who wanted to give more power to the federal government was breaking the Constitution, destroying the foundation of the country. You don't concentrate more power into one set of hands and do any good. That's why God is not an authoritarian, micromanaging Lord of the universe, okay? That's not God. That is the bad guys. That is Lucifer. That's Lilith. That's Borg. Stop worshiping false gods and get a clue that you are a creator too. You are a God in training. Maybe you'll never be a god. Maybe you'll never have your own universe to create in, because you're not that great a creator. But I bet you're probably a better creator than this world gives you credit for, because the creators that really are doing something good are not the ones looking for likes, shares, and subscribes, sponsorships, trying to get more money, trying to become part of the elite club. Those folks that want to be in Davos right now, those are sick people. Oh, they're full of this numpty-dumpty, holier than thou. We just need to fix climate change. Yeah. Greta Thunberg is a Lilithian robot. A proto-satanic female Hitler. And I don't mind saying that. You are pure evil. You don't make sudden changes that are going to destroy lives. That makes you an evil person. That makes you a tyrant. You work within the law. If you don't like the law, you change the law legally. You debate things. You don't shut down the opposition. You don't silence them. You don't censor them. You don't spend thousands of years giving them propaganda, feeding them happy little tales about little baby Jesus who forgive all our sins. And if we just say, I love Jesus, then we're going to go to heaven. It's bullshit. Stop teaching your kids bullshit. Teach them responsibility. Teach them creativity. Teach them how to test what they do before they do it. Don't play with matches, because you might start a fire. Okay, that doesn't mean that you don't use matches. You teach your kids how to do it responsibly. Don't play with guns. That doesn't mean you can't have a gun. It means you use it responsibly. You train the kids how to use it, and you train them how to keep it so somebody else can't use it on you or somebody else. And if you're a maker of guns, you do things that make sure that only its owner can fire it. I'm all for responsible gun ownership, responsible use. I'm not for authoritarian restrictions on people that live out in the sticks and they still hunt for some of their living. They still have to shoot a dog that's killing their chickens. There are people that's true of, and they got every right to hunt. I don't particularly admire people that go out hunting and killing things. I've done it once myself, and I hated it. I had to go entertain some clients when I was a sales engineer with Schlumberger Well Services. Yes, I have worked in the oil industry too, so I know quite a lot about that industry, as well as the electronics industry, as well as programming, software, and acting, and the God industry. That's why I'm doing this channel. I got information that I don't guess anybody was prepped to have so that they could get the awakening I had and fill in the blanks like I've been filling in my blanks ever since my accelerated spiritual awakening began. At any rate, where was I going with this? I don't know. We're at an hour and a half, so I'm going to wrap this up. Like, share, subscribe, interact in any way. If I have time, we'll get into it. I'm very open to heated discussion. I would love, absolutely love to debate somebody who wants to defend cosmic oneness. I would absolutely love to debate someone that says consciousness comes from the brain. It's all the result of chemical interactions. It's in our DNA. Sorry, that's not where consciousness comes from. I can prove it. Anyway, till next time, this is Rob Trump with the Honest Hour.